UFC Fight Night. Kai Kara France versus Amir Albazi. Guys, we've had a 2-week layoff with no UFC whatsoever. Nice to have a little bit of a break, but let's be honest, what's a Saturday without a UFC event going on? So definitely glad that we have some action this weekend taking place in the Apex. And guys, I've had 2 weeks, so I'd be a real fraud if I didn't go through all of these fights in their entirety. So I've been crunching the numbers, I've been doing the data, I've been studying the film, and I'm going to be bringing you my picks and predictions for all of these fights. Starting with a light heavyweight fight, Philipe Lins versus Maxim Grishin. Philipe Lins is the plus 115 underdog at the timing of this video. He's 2-2 in his last 4 fights, with wins coming over OSP and Prachnio. Maxim Grishin, on the other hand, is 2-2 in his last 4 fights, with a win coming over William Knight, one of those, and he is the minus 135 favorite. This fight should be a pretty back and forth one. Philipe Lins really seems like he has gotten his diet together, wink wink, since his Tanner Boser fight. I really encourage you to go and just look at what he looked like in that fight versus in his most recent fights versus OSP. The dude, I don't know if he got ab implants, but he looks like a totally different dude. He also changed up his facial hair and his hair a little bit. Sometimes that can have some effects on your physique, but that's all I'm going to go into in terms of Philipe Lins, how he looks. But in terms of his actual fight ability, he definitely has fought a lot better in his most recent wins than in that Tanner Boser fight where he got knocked out. He's quick, he's explosive, even though he's a bit up there in age. Maxim Grishin, on the other hand, is older and has not had the youthful renaissance that Philipe Lins has had. Grishin kind of was beaten up on some PFL guys, then lost in the UFC. He's slower than Philipe Lins, and I think Lins is going to come forward and get the finish in this one. So Philipe by KO is going to be the pick in this one, and you're getting him at underdog money. So I was a fan of that fight. That's been one of my definitely one of the favorite picks of mine in this card. Moving on to a bantamweight fight between Damon Blackshear and Luan Lacerda. Blackshear is going to be the underdog in this fight at plus 125, slight underdog. He is 0-1-1 in the UFC with a draw versus Zalal and a loss to Farid Basharat, I believe, not his brother Javid. And that's a great time. We got the ambulance running by. Sorry about that. But his opponent is going to be Luan Lacerda, who is this is his second fight in the UFC. He's coming off of a loss versus Cody Stamann. So both of these guys just getting their UFC career started, and they really got thrown to the dogs with really tough debut fights for both of them. So the UFC clearly thought that they were up to the challenge on these higher ranked opponents. Both guys have yet to, or have sort of failed those first tests and are looking to get their first wins in the UFC. Lacerda is a more flat-footed fighter who sort of prods forward, almost like he's built like a heavyweight. He's got strong hands. And Lacerda, in the grappling, however, is much quicker and more fluid. He's shown good grappling and got into good grappling exchanges with Cody Stamann. He just wasn't really able to keep him down for any period of time, but he held his own in the striking department against Cody as well, which is impressive given Stayman's experience and how good of a striker he's been. Blackshear, on the other hand, he almost got finished in his fight versus Zalal in his debut. He finds himself in bad positions from what I've noticed, where he's kind of in no man's land and isn't really sure where to go with things. So I think Luan Lacerda is going to be able to get Blackshear into one of those precarious positions and find the finish. So Lacerda by sub is going to be the pick here, and he'll be able to add another submission to his resume. Next up is a strawweight fight, Elise Reed versus Jinh Frey. Elise Reed is the slight favorite over Jinh at -130. Elise is 2-3 in her last 5 fights. Jinh Frey is 2-3 as well, all in the UFC. Reed is a Taekwondo fighter, I believe, with some creative striking, but is a bit slow. And versus Loma Lookbonmi, she was kind of getting outpaced in that fight and didn't look like she really matched up athletically to Loma. Jinh Frey also has a loss to Loma Lookbonmi and just recently got finished very quickly in her last fight, so she didn't really have an opportunity to get it going. But Frey, to me, looks like the faster between the two, and even though Elise had that Taekwondo background, I think Jinh Frey is going to be able to put the pace on her, pressure her, and be able to sort of point fight her way to a win with leg kicks and jabs. So Frey by decision is going to be the pick here. I don't see her having the ability to get Elise Reed out of there, but she should find a way to just strike her way to a victory in that one. Next is a lightweight bout between Jamie Mullarkey and Muhammadjon Naimov. Muhammadjon is replacing Guram Kutateladze, who pulled out of yet another fight. This is like his, probably his 25th time pulling out of a fight in the past 3 years. The guy just really, I don't know if he has bad luck or what it is, but he just is definitely had a tough time getting just into the octagon. That's been harder for Guram than the actual fights that he takes place in, which is pretty crazy. So Naimov is, this is going to be his first fight in the UFC. He did have a Dana White Contender Series fight 3 years ago when he was like 25, when he lost. And since then, he's sort of been beating up on amateurs with bad records. I think this is the only guy the UFC could really could find. Jamie Mullarkey is a good striker, all-around fighter. Had that close decision win over Michael Johnson that was kind of questionable. I did not think he won that fight, but still he's got that 4-1 record in his last 5. And I just don't think he's the type of guy you want to make your UFC debut against, especially if you failed the closest thing you had to a UFC type bout in the past. So Jamie Mullarkey should make this look easy. I think he's going to want to make a statement with a KO, and Muhammadjon just does not match up with him in the striking department. Jamie Mullarkey will be able to find a KO in that one. Coming up on our next fight, which is a bantamweight fight between John Castaneda and Muin Gafurov. Castaneda is the -140 favorite and is 2-2 in the UFC, with his most recent fight being a loss versus Daniel Santos. Gafurov is making his UFC debut, but he does have some ONE FC experience, in which case he had some success in ONE. He had a fight versus John Lineker and fought pretty well in that fight, all things considered. He was much younger than he is now, less experienced, and John Lineker is very experienced and also has a pretty good diet, I'm guessing. So he did impress in that loss and has since put together some highlight reel KOs with a spinning heel kick KO, and has just found a lot of success. Hailing from Tajikistan. I should mention that the last fighter is also from Tajikistan, so probably the first time we ever have two Tajiks on the same card. Kind of cool. Nonetheless, I'm liking the value we get from Gafurov in this one. He's got a good gas tank and pace. Castaneda, on the other hand, comes out swinging, but has had trouble later on in fights in his career. In his last fight, he almost found a way to get a finish in the first round and then couldn't really keep up the pace and wound up getting finished himself. So I think Gafurov finds a way to get a KO in the second or third round. Just has to survive that early onslaught from Castaneda. So Gafurov is going to be the pick in that one. And we're going to transition to the heavyweights, which showcase the immortal Andrei Arlovski taking on Don'Tale Mayes. Don'Tale Mayes is going to be the minus 125 favorite in this one. He's 2-2-1 in his last 5. And Arlovski, on the other hand, is 4-1 in his last 5. He's really been surging as of late at the ripe age of 44 years old. The question in this fight is going to be, can Arlovski avoid getting knocked out for 15 minutes? And I will answer that by saying yes, I do think he will be able to dance around long enough to just be able to outstrike Don'Tale, touch him up a bit, get out of the way. Arlovski has been moving pretty well in the past, but if Don'Tale even gets within the vicinity of that big Russian chin, I think Arlovski's going to sleep. So Arlovski knows that better than anyone. I think he's going to be careful of the power of Don'Tale Mayes, and Don'Tale I don't think has the cardio really to take too many shots at Arlovski, so he's probably going to plod around, end up punching air most of the time and gas himself out. So Arlovski really just has to be disciplined in this one and never for a split second let up or just be okay with any position he's in. He's got to be either within range to strike himself and then immediately out of range, or just got to dodge around completely. So Arlovski, we're going to see how well his gas tank holds up in this one. I think so long as it does, he finds a way to get a decision win over Don'Tale Mayes, which would add another win to his very long resume. Back to the bantamweights, we have in our next fight Daniel Santos versus Johnny Munoz. Daniel Santos, I just mentioned for having that comeback victory KO over Castaneda. Johnny Munoz, on the other hand, is 2-2 in the UFC. Most recently, he has a notable loss to Tony Gravely, in which he got finished pretty quickly. Munoz, I think, is going to look to grapple in this one. That's his bread and butter. And Santos is going to not want to get in grapple with Johnny Munoz. I think he has the big advantage in the striking department over Munoz. And if Munoz stands up for too long, I think he's inevitably going to get rocked. So Munoz has shown that he's can be finished before, and I think Santos is going to find his chin sooner or later in this fight, probably in the second or third round, just like his previous fight. So Santos by finish is going to be the pick here. He's the far more explosive of the two, and his grappling, at least defensively, is going to be strong enough to avoid him getting finished. Moving on to a welterweight fight, we have a member of that Dagestani clan, Abubakar Nurmagomedov. I'm sure he's Khabib's cousin, or somewhat related. He's at least 2 degrees of separation from Khabib, for sure. I think he's his cousin. He is going to be the slight underdog, actually, in this fight at minus 105. It's essentially a pick-em. He's 2-1 in the UFC. Lost his debut and then won two in a row with his most recent coming against Omar Gadzhiev. And his opponent is Elizeu dos Santos, who is 3-2 in his last 5. Abubakar is a strong grappler. Obviously, he's coming from Dagestan. That's their MO. Everyone knows what he wants to do. And I think he's okay on the feet, but he's usually going to be outmatched on the feet versus a majority of his opponents, and especially some of the better guys in that welterweight division. Dos Santos, on the other hand, much more explosive. His punches are going to land harder, and he really does have finishing ability with his hands. Dos Santos has shown a good grappling defense before. He can get taken down, but he's not going to accept the position. He's going to get back on his feet. And I can see Abubakar getting frustrated on the feet, shooting some takedowns more desperately and not setting them up as well and mixing them in with his striking and gassing himself out, in which case I think Dos Santos finds a way to get a decision win in this one, outstrikes Abubakar. I think he's definitely gonna land the heavier strikes and have a chance to wobble Abubakar, who has shown that he can't take a punch as well as Khabib. I'll say that. So Dos Santos by decision is the pick. I think you're inevitably or inherently getting some value just by betting against someone with Nurmagomedov in their name, because I feel like the odds are just slightly favored because of that fact alone and nothing else about the fighter. So I think there's some inherent value in that as well. A couple featherweights are up next. Karine Silva, who is 1-0 in the UFC. She's the big favorite. She's 2-1 favorite in this one at -225. On the other hand is Ketlen Souza, her opponent. She is the +190 underdog, making her UFC debut. Silva is a really strong grappler. She has had 2 back-to-back submission wins in the UFC. One in Dana White Contender Series and one in the UFC. And on the other hand, Souza is a good fighter. She's had some success outside of the UFC, but we've seen her get out-muscled and out-grappled in previous fights, and those are against fighters who probably do not have the grappling ability of Silva. I think Silva is going to have the strength advantage, which is going to be a big advantage when it comes to grappling, and she'll be able to find a way to get into winning positions out of different scrambles between them. So I see Silva being able to control this one on the ground, and Souza is tough to put away. I don't think she's been submitted, or she's only been submitted once in her career, and that's kind of tough to bank on. So I see Silva just controlling her and getting a decision win that way. Next up is, and I believe that fight is kicking off the main card, or the Abubakar is. Silva was next up on the main card, and the third fight on the main card is going to be between the featherweights Tim Elliott and Victor Altamirano. Tim Elliott is the favorite in this at -180. He's 3-2 in his last 5, with some of his notable fights being a win versus Tagir, you know what I'm talking about, and a loss to Mateus Nicolau. And all of his other fights have been against big names in that featherweight division. The guy's been around forever. He's really has kind of fought out everyone. His opponent is Victor Altamirano. He's coming off of 2 wins, a close win over Lacerda, in which he got rocked early and then found a way to get on top and reign his own ground and pound and get a finish, and then a decision win over Vinicius Salvador. Tim Elliott, like I said, he's been in there with everyone. It'll be really interesting to see his mentality going into this, as he's had this very highly publicized by himself cheating scandal in which his wife, I think his current wife, cheated on him with his teammate on their wedding night. Definitely, the spiciest drama coming out of the UFC in terms of, relationships that probably we've ever seen. And he, normally I wouldn't even mention that, but he's publicized that himself. He put that out there into the universe. So it definitely needs to be discussed going into this fight. Where's his mental at? Certainly, he's explained that was a pretty insane thing to go through, and he's still going through that. I'm sure he's feeling the effects of his personal life bleeding into his fighting career. So the question is, do we see demon mode, just been taking all of that pent-up aggression and passion, ready to unleash it in the cage? Or are we going to see a guy who's not fully been locked in like he should be, and most likely and is just not fully prepared? So that's the question that needs to be answered. And it just seems like there's a lot going on with Tim Elliott, and I think any sort of outside distractions are always a negative. He also is not going to have James Krause in his corner, who's been in his corner for several of his fights and is his coach. So he's had that thing sort of clouding over him and his career as well in the past year or so. Victor Altamirano, he's not, there's not a whole lot to be said about him. He's 2-0, like I mentioned. I think he's had a later start to his career, but has definitely been impressive. Fighting out of San Antonio. Tim Elliott is a guy who really will do whatever it is to win, and the ironic part is he kind of cheats a lot as well when he fights. He's a guy who's going to grab the cage, he's going to grab your gloves. He's even grabbed some shorts and stuff, all to gain a little bit of an edge. And I think a point deduction is very live in this fight. So my pick is going to be a draw in this fight. Yes, a draw. I don't know if any of you guys have ever seen someone call their shot like this. I'm literally Babe Ruth, aiming down the center field. I'm calling my shot. This fight will end in a draw. Elliott's going to be up. He's going to get a point taken away, and then it's going to be like, oh, snap. Like, this is anyone's fight now. Victor is going to find a way to win a round, and it's going to be a draw. So that's the pick. Could be a first in UFC, in the UFC betting community. So if he does get a draw here, you, viewer, and 5 of your friends have to subscribe. Word is bond if that happens. So would be nuts. Let's just say that. Next up is a lightweight fight versus Jim Miller and Jesse Butler. This video is getting too long. Jim Miller, you know who he is. He's a vet. He's had some success of late. He's coming off of a loss, but had 2 KOs in a row. Before that, he's facing up against Jesse Butler. He's making his UFC debut. Jim Miller, I think he's got his eyes set on some records that could stand for a very long time in the UFC. First to 25 wins, and first to fight in like the 100s, 200s, and 300s of the UFC in terms of like pay-per-view numbers. So the guy's got lofty aspirations. He's not showing any sign of slowing down. Butler, on the other hand, he's making his debut. He's usually fighting at 145 in the featherweight division. So Jim Miller is going to have some beef on him as well. I think with all that experience and that size advantage, Jim Miller will win this fight. I say he wins by decision. Our co-main is Alex Caceres versus Daniel Pineda. Alex Caceres is the favorite in this fight. He's 4-1 in his last 5 fights, and coming off of that sick KO versus Julian Erosa, he had that slick, hit down low to the high kick that just completely had Erosa's head spinning, knocked him out. And his opponent is Daniel Pineda, who's the plus 150 underdog. He is 2-1-1 in the UFC with a recent submission win over Tucker Lutz. He's been much less active than Caceres. I think he's dealt with some injuries, but he did not look his age in his most recent fight. He looked phenomenal, showed power, showed strength, endurance. We're just really impressed despite being off of a 1 or 2 year layoff. So Caceres, he's a vet. He's pretty much good everywhere. He's got that awkward striking style that's hard to deal with, and he also knows how to get some submission finishes. But on the other hand, he himself has been tapped out several times. Pineda is a guy who only knows how to get finishes. He's finished every one of his 27 victories. I'm going to say that again because it bears repeating. Finished every one of his 27 wins. That's insane, even if a majority of them weren't taking place in the UFC. He looked just really strong in his last fight. I think he rocks Caceres and finds the finish here. So Pineda by finish is the pick. I think he wobbles Caceres and then gets a ground and pound win. And then finally, our main event, we have Kai Kara-France of New Zealand taking on Amir Albazi, fighting out of London, I believe, by way of Iraq. Kai Kara-France is 3-2 in his last 5. He's got notable wins over Cody Garbrandt and Askarov. His most recent fight was that title shot versus Brandon Moreno. Or was that a contender fight? Hold on. No fake news here. Double check. Kai Kara-France. What was it? Yeah, I'm sleeping. That was for the belt. I wasn't sure if it was one of those transitions for when Moreno had just lost it from Figgy. No. So he fought really well versus Moreno, was winning during periods of that fight. Then Moreno had that liver kick from hell that put Kai Kara-France away. He doubled over immediately. He was over as soon as it landed. But Kai Kara-France has definitely proven that he's in that top echelon of talent in the featherweight division. Amir Albazi, on the other hand, he's only had 4 fights in the UFC total, but he's had 4 wins over Malcolm Gordon, Zhumagulov, Figueiredo's brother, Francisco, I believe, and most recently over Alessandro Costa. So those names, obviously, they're not top 5 talents, but they're not slouches either. Zhumagulov is a guy who is the ultimate definition of gatekeeper, a guy who's good enough to beat anyone, but is just constantly getting tested by these prospects and failing. But he really proved himself in these fights. Albazi has proven an ability to adapt. Kai Kara-France, on the other hand, he's had ups and downs in his careers. hasn't been able to capture the belt, but has been in the conversation for a bit now, for a few fights. We have seen Kai Kara-France have success against similar opponents. I guess you could say Askarov kind of comes in with a similar game plan to Albazi, where he wants to wrestle you, mix in the grappling a bit, and pressure you. Albazi, I think, has better striking, certainly more explosive striking. So Kai Kara-France definitely has proven the ability to win against these types of guys, but at the same time, in that Askarov fight, for example, he's found himself into pickles where he's in a difficult position and he gives up his back, and I do not see him being able to afford to do that to Amir Albazi. Kai Kara-France is definitely an explosive striker. He's got those high expectations simply for the fact that he's been around for a while. He's got that popularity behind his name, and he fights out of Volk and Izzy's gym, City Kickboxing. So he definitely has a lot of pressure to add another championship to that gym's roster. And I think perhaps that's benefited him a bit as well in his career, being able to get some of these higher ranked fights. Although he's certainly owned them with his production in the cage as well. But I think Kai Kara-France runs into another hurdle this fight versus Amir Albazi. He'll have some success early, but Albazi has shown an ability to adapt and adjust his game plan during fights versus Costa. Most recently, he picked up on one of Costa's habits. He kept throwing the same punch, same hook, exposing himself, and he used that to explode with an uppercut and find a finish. So even when he's seemingly having troubles in fights, he's constantly looking to evolve his game plan and switch things up and really find the most advantageous strategy for himself during fights. So Kai Kara-France might land some clean shots early and defend a few takedowns, but Albazi, I think, is just going to be too much. He's going to pressure him. He's always going to be moving forwards and pushing Kai Kara-France up against the cage. And Amir Albazi during the weigh-ins definitely looked bigger, and he should have a strength advantage in this as well. So it'll be interesting to see how Albazi's cardio holds up. We haven't seen him in a 5-round fight in the UFC, but I don't see him needing 5 rounds to get a finish in this one. I think he gets a finish within 4. Just using his grappling and pressuring Kai Kara-France, not letting up at all. Albazi is looking to become the first, I believe, Middle Eastern champion in the UFC history. A win here will put him right on that path and set him up for potentially a title fight. So, because that division's looking pretty wide open after the Moreno's next fight versus Pantoja, I believe. So, Albazi by finish is the pick. Let me know your guys' picks below. How do we think Elliott's going to respond to all this? Any predictions at all, or if you disagree with anything I've said. But with that, that will do it. Have a great weekend and enjoy the card. Peace.